Okay, so I'm recording, and for those of you who wish, I have the WebEx broadcasting as well, so you can find that, of course, up in my the class folder. So if you go ETSU E3, DIGM classes, Greg, it's this WebEx link right there. And you should be able to watch what I have on my screen on yours. Today's not going to be a full class lecture. I'm going to just show you a couple of things that I really didn't want to have to squeeze in during the last lecture. I'm also going to kind of recap a few things really quickly just from the last lecture, because there was a lot of stuff. Right? We threw all the materials in there. We threw lighting in there. We threw the basics of rendering. And so we're going to kind of recap that a little bit by applying a texture to some objects. Actually, I already have some on here, but I'm going to undo that. Or not a texture, but a material. There we go. So I got these two objects in here. I'm going to go ahead and apply some materials to them kind of quickly, put some lights in there kind of quickly, because those are questions I get a lot. So you'll see that again. And then I'm going to create a new camera, because we are currently looking through a camera. If you look down here at the bottom, PERSP, we're looking through a perspective camera. I can make as many cameras as I want in here. I can make, just like in the real world, if I wanted to go out on a film shoot, I could have 10 cameras filming the same object at the same time. And so I'm going to make a new camera. We're going to put a little bit of animation on that camera. And then I'm going to show you how to render out a sequence of images. After we do that, I'm going to show you what to do with that sequence of images to turn it into a movie. So this is kind of the picking up the pieces at the end. This is how you take all of this stuff that you've been working on, how do you make it into something you can show to people, right? And I'm the people you're going to show it to. So Monday is when this project is due. How many of you have made some significant progress on it? How many of you have been working on it for a while? Cool. So there's a couple of things you're going to run into, and I'll give you sort of a heads up about those now. One of them is some of you are going to want water, and through meandering through Maya's materials, you're going to see that there's a water texture in there, and you're going to apply that to your object, and then try to render it in Arnold, and it's not going to render. That's because that texture doesn't work with Arnold. I can show you some alternatives to that if water is what you're wanting. And we can use some of class time today for that if you'd like. It's sort of like pick up a few things at the end. The other thing is some of you are going to want mountains. Some of you are going to want a bunch of hills and terrain and stuff like that, right? And I can show you kind of I don't want to say an easy way, but a couple of tools that are in Maya that will allow you to get some of those. So actually, we'll go ahead and do some of those at the beginning here, just because they're kind of easy. The water one, not as easy. There's actually a whole bunch of different answers to that, and none of them are click a button, right? All of them are like a couple of extra steps. So I'm going to show you what I think is probably the best option for water at this point, because all of the other options require a lot of really complex materials and stuff like that. So how do you feel like it's going so far? Any major issues you're running into? So many issues? Anybody else in the so many issues cart of this train? No? Okay.
The fact that Maya expects you to know where everything is.
It does. I think that's actually one of the skills you learn in this class is that I don't know where everything is either. But I kind of have some techniques on how I would find them, right? And so generally Maya kind of categorizes everything. And so you kind of have to think of like, what category would that fall into, right? Like if I needed to, but I will tell you, there is a way to insert an extra edge loop into your model, no matter what your model looks like, right? And so that's a good one. Like, oh, I need to insert an edge loop. I'm sure that's a thing because I just told you that's a thing. The way that you would start looking for that is to make sure you're first in the right category, right? And so like Right now we're under the modeling menu, but if you're under animation menu, you could look all day. You're not going to find it up here. And it's probably not, it may be in this shelf, but figuring out what each of these icons mean, yeah, that's confusing, right? So you're like, okay, this is something I want to do to a model, and it's a polygon model. So let's just go to the modeling tab and see if we can find it from there. So in the modeling tab, if I just start reading my menu items, some of these aren't going to make sense yet. Like UV, we haven't really even talked about what that means. I don't want to deform it. I just want to add some extra. I mean, eventually I want to deform that or change its shape. I just want to add some different elements or some additional elements to the mesh, right? And so when you look at these, you just kind of look for which of those words seem like it's going to have something to do with that. It's not necessarily how it's displayed. We're actually changing it. So it's probably one of these three. Probably mesh, edit mesh, or mesh tools, right? Because what we're doing is trying to change our mesh, right? And so at least we've narrowed it down to those three menus. And I'll be honest, I always forget which one the insert edge loop tool is in. I have to check them. So if I click mesh, you'll see stuff like, oh, this is where I can combine two different meshes, or this is where I can mirror an object, right? I'm not seeing it in here. If I go to edit mesh, I see a whole bunch of different tools in here. Anybody see insert edge loop? No. Okay, so that must mean it's under mesh tools. And so there it is, insert edge loop, right? So usually if you're going to edit a model, it's under edit mesh or mesh tools, right? If you're needing to make something deform, it's going to be under deformers. And you're going to be able to find deformers in both the modeling menu and the animation and rigging menus. So like especially at this point, it's a little overwhelming. One of the other issues you're probably going to run into is, at this point, you may just not know what to call that thing, right? Like you're like, I need it to another circle around my object. I need more circles around it. And if you start searching circle, you're going to find a different tool that's not what you need, right? And that just takes a little bit of time. And frankly, like when you struggle with it once, when you're like, I need that tool that inserts a circle, and you fight with that for 2 hours, when you finally find it, you'll remember it, right? So it takes a little bit of time of struggling with that. I know these first few weeks and this first project is like, it's frustrating, right? Because like it's all new. I'm asking you to do something on a time schedule, and that's why I'm here though. And that's one of the reasons I'll be here after we finish up what we're looking at today. I'll be here the rest of this class, and I'll be here on Friday too to help answer any questions you have there. And there's been a pretty decent turnout of people coming in on Fridays who have issues. That is the best time to work with me one-on-one, because when I'm in my office, if any of you came by my office, you recognize that usually there's a line of about 3 people standing outside of my office. And so unless you want to have to arm wrestle them, this is the best place to catch me. So, other issues you're having? Other things you're wanting to do but you don't necessarily know how to right now?
There are things that you went over how to do in class, but for some reason I can't figure out how to do them still. So I've been doing things to make it work, even though I'm making it harder on myself.
Mm-hmm.
And I tried watching a lot of the videos, but I can't really find how to fix anything. So
Okay. We can look at that one-on-one. Also, the videos from this class should be up on the YouTube page. There should be a link to it. So if you can remember where I said it, you can find that in the link. I know that the videos get a little long and sometimes it's hard to fish through them. But for me, what I do for stuff like this is I just put it on the other screen or put it over in the corner, let it play while I have my headphones on and I'm working. I'm not necessarily watching it. And eventually I'll hear something and be like, wait, what? That's that thing I needed. And you can go back and kind of find that. But yeah, specifically any of those questions, wave me down at the end of class here and I can help you work them out. So let's kind of go over this quickly. I'm going to get it back. This is not your scene, obviously. I'm going to get a couple of things. I'm going to apply some materials to this. I'm going to show you how to sort of make some mountains and some water in this, right? I'm going to create a camera, or I'm going to create some lights, I'm going to create a camera, I'm going to animate that camera, we're going to render out a sequence. Now the rendering would take a while, so what I'll probably use is a different image sequence I already have to show you how to edit that together in Premiere, and then once that's edited together in Premiere, how to export that out as an MP4. It'll be in the format that you could upload that to YouTube. It's the right compression and everything that it will play really, really well. So, all right, let's go and get started here. So, the first thing, I need some materials on this stuff, right? If you've forgotten how to do that, select the object, right-click, assign new material. Which material am I looking for? Anybody remember which one we were using? AI standard surface. So if we go to shaders under Arnold, it will narrow it down a little bit so we don't have to dig through all of those. And it's right there, AI standard surface. I will say there's a lot of AI materials, and sometimes it's hard to remember which one. But there's only 2 AI standard. So it's basically standard means we can use it for almost anything, right? I will say, like, there's some neat stuff in here. There's a toon shader in here where we can render this to look like cell shaded animation. There's a lot of neat shaders in here, and you'll learn to use some more of these later. But in most cases, you're going to need AI standard surface. So I'm going to click that. So now my object, that object, has this AI standard surface material. Again, I can change colors on this. I can do whatever I want to. Or I can change my preset to one of these presets over here. This will get me a good start. It may not be finished, but let's do car paint metallic. Replace that. And so now we got a sort of a metallic material on here. For my cube here, I'm going to go ahead and scale that up. Again, kind of do the same thing. Right-click, assign new material. Shader, AI standard surface. If you want to play around with these, there's just a lot. Just play with these sliders to see what you're getting. But to see what we're going to get, we need to actually have a render of this going. So if I open my render view, hit play, as it is right now, it renders a bunch of nothing. And you'll see down here this little yellow box that pops up. Whenever you see yellow or red at the bottom of your screen, that means Maya is giving you a warning. Yellow means you might want to know this. Red means something just screwed up, right? Like what you tried to do didn't work. So this worked. It just didn't give us a result that Maya thinks we would want, right? And it's right. I don't see anything. So I'm going to go ahead and close this down, and I'm going to create a new light. Now, some of you are going to create lights this way, and some of these lights will work with Arnold, but some of them won't. So I would just get in the habit of using these lights that are listed under the Arnold tab. So Arnold, lights, and I'll just start with an area light. So again, an area light, very much like a fluorescent light in that it has a shape, right? It's basically this entire plane, this entire box will be casting light. So if you make it smaller, it's going to be more like a flashlight. If you make it big, it's going to be more like a fluorescent light above our head, right? And we can change this however we want to. The direction the light is shining is going to be based off of this, this line here, right? So now if I go back to Arnold render view and hit play, you may or may not be able to see it. I can see it a little bit on mine, but I have, where did that go? I hate that. Break that off there. Tried to mount it. So you can kind of see a little bit right in here, and I can start turning up my intensity, but usually the first thing I do is I just uncheck normalize. Normalize is there for a reason, and there are good reasons to use that, but not today. Today I'm gonna sort of do it differently, right? So I'm gonna use my light. I can scale this around. You can start seeing the differences that I get just by moving it. And it should update in real time. So as I make changes to this, you're going to see how it affects my lighting, right? So again, this is just one light casting in one direction. Right? So we could use something like this if we wanted to. Maybe scoot it back a little bit so that the black line is back there. I can zoom in on my objects, right? Now, as you see, like that middle flake, it needs to be brighter on your screen, doesn't it? So if I want to make it brighter, I can turn up my intensity or my exposure. It's actually looking pretty good on my screen, but it's looking a little dark on yours, so, or on the monitor up there. So I'll turn it up a little bit. So you may or may not be able to see, I'm getting some little metal flake in there from that car paint, right? And although I set this as an AI standard surface, I didn't set a preset on it. So I could go in here and I could set one of my presets to something like clay. So let's replace that. All right, so now we're getting clay, more of a clay box look. Right? And if I wanted to, I'll just quickly add some divisions and smooth that. So let's make that like 3, right? And then I can hit 3 over here on the object. Hit stop on this. This is slowing me down. There we go. And that way, I get a little block of clay. Okay, cool. So now we have a couple of objects we can see, and we could do a render of this. Now, a couple of things you're going to run into, we get this a lot, is that light is casting out a bunch of points, and so you may or may not be able to see it, but my shadows here are kind of grainy. Like there's like speckles all in it. And so if I go choose my light, I'm going to show you another way we can choose the light. We can choose that through our outliner and just choose this area light here. If I choose my light, go to my attribute editor, I can make that less grainy by turning up the number of samples I have here. I would type in that number instead of cranking up that number, just because that's going to slow your render time down significantly. 5 usually is okay as a good starting point. 5 is a little on the, like you could probably get away with 2 or 3 if you're not really close to the shadows or something like that. And so with that, my shadows are much smoother, but my render time went from 3 seconds to, still rendering, 14 seconds, right? And this isn't even the full-size image. Like this is 960 by 540. The image size you're going to render is at least 1280 by 720, right? And so we'll look at some more of that, more of those details here in just a minute. But we have a render. It's looking okay. I'm happy with that, right? So let's talk just a little bit about some water and some environment, or some giving my object some. Sorry, let's do 36. Some form of like detail in here, right? So first things first, I want to be able to sort of sculpt this a little bit where I can see it. My grid's kind of getting in my way, so I'm going to click this button up here and it will hide my grid along the top of my viewport, just so I can see my object a little bit better. And in order to get like some detail in this, I mean, we can model mountains out of this. You already kind of know how to do that, right? I can go to vertex, I can grab that, and I can start adjusting this a couple of points at a time, right? Like that is completely doable, just a little bit slow. And let's say if you change your mind later, you may want to, make some changes, right? So there's a lot of detail to change in there. If I hit B, you remember that, it gives us that soft select. And if I hold down B, I can change the size of that soft select by holding down B and scroll, clicking, right-clicking, or left-clicking on my mouse. And now when I move that, I can do stuff like this, right? But that's not super intuitive as a way of creating a landscape. So what I'm going to do instead, so I'm going to go back to object mode. I'm going to put a little more detail in this just by increasing the number of subdivisions in it, right? I'm also going to make it a little bit bigger. Just make it bigger like that, right? And then in this polyplane input down here, instead of 10 and 10, I'm going to make it, let's try 50. 50 and 50, right? So now I got a lot of details in here. Now there's 2 or 3 different ways that we could start doing this, but the one I'm going to show you is pretty neat. This whole, like right next to modeling tools here, this whole menu right here next to it says sculpting. And the entire thing is dedicated to some different types of mesh editing tools, right? There's a couple of other software packages that are much better at sculpting than Maya. Autodesk owns one of them. It's called Mudbox. And I think it's on these computers if you're wanting to play around with Mudbox. One that I know is on these computers is owned by Pixelogic. It's called ZBrush. That's probably the one you're going to hear the most about. And frankly, it's because it's the most robust of the sculpting tools. It's the one that you can do the most with. But that also means that it's the most complicated. And it works completely differently than every other 3D software package. Most people really get frustrated when they're first trying to learn ZBrush. So that's why instead of hopping into ZBrush today, we're just going to learn a little bit about sculpting in here. Sculpting just means we can use artificial brushes or tools in the same way we could actual sculpting tools, right? Anybody ever sculpted clay or any other Play-Doh, right? Like if it were Play-Doh, you just found whatever pointy object you had in the house, right? You started gouging holes in your Play-Doh, and you're like, as you probably did a little bit more refined sculpting, there's all sorts of different ways you can get shapes out of models. And so some of these are going to mimic that stuff, right? So let's just look at some of these. First, we have to have an object selected, right? And then when I click on one of these, it's going to apply it, or not apply it, but it's going to let me manipulate this object with that tool, right? So let's start with this one. Okay, so if I click here, now you'll see I have this giant circle, and if I start clicking, I can kind of paint with that giant circle, right? I'm going to undo that. And if I hold down B, I can scale the size of this, right? And so now I can sculpt like this. And so you can start to see how I can kind of quickly get some sort of terrain in here, right? Hard thing about this is, like, look how much it's pulling it up out of the ground. I may not want it to be that tall, right? But no matter how softly I click, it still seems to go that high, right? There's a whole bunch of options for this tool. So I want to show you a new menu that will allow you to sort of adjust any of your tool settings. So of course we have these, we looked at these 5 buttons the other day. The middle one is your attribute editor, remember that? And then all the way on the end is your channel box. Well, the one right between that has a hammer on it. It's like a hammer and 3 dots, right? So that is your tools settings. So if you click on that, it'll open it up in a different window. And you probably have already recognized that you can sort of mount stuff in the viewport here, or in your UI. And so we can do that. And so this is my tool settings for my sculpting tool. And so you'll see size. I can adjust the size here too, just by changing this. That might be a little bit more intuitive to you. Or I can adjust the strength, right? And if I want to take this down to something lower, let's set it to like 2, right? Then when I sculpt, it's going to be very subtle, right? And I can get a little bit more reasonable looking terrain in here. Now, interestingly, every time I click, it pulls up, right? It's pulling the mesh, right? It's like pulling it out, right? Sometimes I want to push it in. For that, I can hold down Control, and you'll see that my brush turns white, and that'll allow me to push it inward. Okay, so I can start getting something like this, right? And so little bits at a time, I can start getting a different model. If you hold down Shift at any point, it will turn it into a smooth tool, and I can kind of smooth out any of my rough edges. There's also a smooth tool up here. I think it's, yeah, that one right there. But this just allows me to quickly toggle between Control or whatever, and then Shift to smooth that out, right? And so with just this one tool, I was able to get quite a bit out of this model, right? Couple of other tools you may like in here. There's this knife tool, which allows you to sort of cut into your object a little more precisely. And then the one I like is this grab tool right here, which really just allows you to grab sections and pull up on it. Right? And so you can very quickly just kind of nudge stuff around this way. You have to be careful to not like, smear it in like a weird direction, right? Okay. So we got this. I'm going to go ahead and pull my ground down a little bit more here. Let's say I wanted some water in this now, okay? That is complicated because there's probably about 5 different ways to get water in Maya. And the real question you need to ask is, do you really need water? Because water is a complex simulation of like particles, right? Or do you just need something that renders to look like water, right? Like, there's a difference in needing a glass of water that you're going to pour out on the table versus an ocean, right? Both of those are, like, Maya's not going to create those two things in the same way. And in most of your cases, what you're needing is just something that looks like water, right? And so what I'm going to do is just create a plane. So if I get a polygon modeling and I just create a plane, right, and scale that up, you'll see that I have this thing now that I can kind of, I want to give my ground a different color just so we can see it. Assign new material, shader, my surface, and we'll just set that as let's go ahead and do it as clay as well, and then I'll change that color to green. All right, so maybe like that. So just so we can see, what just happened? I chose green. Okay. So now when I grab my water here, I can submerge that a little bit below my plane, and you'll start to see that it makes a little pond under there, right? Now, for some of you, this may be enough. For some of you, that's plenty. You don't want to, maybe you just turn this blue, but you also may want like some ripples in there or something like that. So there's a couple of different ways we can get that. I can assign a new material to that, right? And I can just under. I'm not gonna. I don't want to go through that too much. Actually, let me just show you the way of kind of creating a pond or an ocean. Okay, so there are right now I think 3 main simulators that will allow you to get sort of an artificial water. Right. One of them is called Bifrost. That sounds like a snow simulator, right? But it's not. It's a fluid simulator, and that's the one you would use if you needed to pour a glass of water out on the table, right? It's literally like water that flows into things, right? The one that we're going to use is called BOSS, B-O-S-S. And BOSS is not really water. BOSS is more like a ripple simulator, right? So one of the things we could do is we could just apply some ripples to this object. BOSS will allow you to simulate just a little bit of how that moves around. Again, I'll do this kind of quickly. You can watch the video, and I can help you with it one-on-one if this is something you want to do. But what I'm going to do, I'm going to make this a little more detailed. Let's do 30 by 30. Nah, let's do higher, 50. And then I'm going to go to, this is going to be under effects. Okay, so we have modeling, rigging, animation, effects. So you'll notice right there, there's a couple of different things out here. There's Bifrost, Boss, Mash. There's also another way you could do it with just particles. So we get these end particles over here, right? So I'm just going to use Boss, and I'm going to open up the Boss editor. I think. Or Maya's going to crash on me. Not sure. Ah, there it goes. Yay! Didn't crash. So, we need, there's two different options. There's these two different things here. There's either a wave solver or a spectral wave. You'll need a wave solver if you plan on actually putting something in the water and making it ripple. Right? Like if you wanted to have your character throw an object into, or one of your cars crash into the water, you would use the wave solver, right? And I'll show you that here in a second. But this one right here is the one I wanted to look at. It's this little blue circle. We're just going to create a spectral wave. Okay. Just to make sure I did that correctly, we need to do that while my object is selected. I think I did. Let's see if we hit play now, or if I go to playback speed, real time, and hit play. Apparently not. Let's try that again. I'm going to delete that. Let's reopen the boss solver, or boss center. There we go. So with this selected, create spectral wave, and then if I hit play, you'll see that it just kind of ripples a little bit, right? Now, all of that is an attribute that is on this object. If I go to my attribute editor, you got to hit stop sometimes to be able to see it. We have this, all of these different tabs that say boss on it. It's this boss spectral wave, right? You're going to see it starts on frame 2, which means on frame 1 it's not simulating, but as soon as I hit play it does, right? And there's all of these different numbers we can change in here. Like if we wanted to make the ocean way deeper, we can. And that just makes the waves a little bit wider and slower, right? So we can make this deeper. We can also change the wave height, right? If I wanted to make this like crazy, like, you know, ripply ocean, I can. I'm going to set this kind of low. I'm going to set it to like 0.5, right? And I'm going to increase my patch size a little bit just to see what we get out of that. I think that's still a little bit too big. I'm going to take that back to 100. So we can play around with this. The biggest thing is just playing around with it until you get you know, the simulation that you're looking for. And for me, like, that's not bad. So now I just need this to kind of render a little bit. I'm going to hit 3 on this just to smooth that. Now I just need this to render a little bit more like water. Like if I go to my render view now and hit play, like my grass or my ground is green, right? Let me go ahead and pull this back. I may even have to put an extra light in there. But my water is rendering as this gray color, right? And so if I just apply a new material to that as well, shader, AI standard surface, well, that's going to make it shiny automatically, right? And then I can just start playing around with the color to get a color I like for my water, right? This is like sort of a simple way of getting something that, you know, looks a little bit like water. There's other presets you can try as well. For example, there's a glass preset, but if I replace it with that, it looks super shiny, transparent, right? So maybe what I would do instead of giving it 100% glass, maybe I would put like 50% glass. See what that does. So maybe that's going to start to look a little bit more like water in the way that I want it to, right? And you can see a little bit more floating in there when I hit play. That's rendering really dark on your screen where I scooted that light back. So just to give us a little bit more light in this scene, though, overall, I'm going to go ahead and duplicate my area light, Control D, move this up here, move this over here, rotate it, scale it, and move it way up. And then we'll render some more and see how much we need to turn up the light on that. There we go. So now we're getting a little bit more like an environment, right? Okay. So, last thing I'm going to do in here before I start rendering this as an image sequence is I'm going to put a camera in here. I mean, I know I've been moving around my my perspective camera, but what you kind of need that, right? You kind of need to be able to tumble around your objects and look at them from different sides, even like while you're working on your animation and stuff like that, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a completely new camera, and I'm going to try to set up my viewport here, or my scene here, my Maya layout here, where I can see both of those at the same time, right? So let me show you some of how we can do that. So I'm going to go ahead and hit stop on that render. Go ahead and close that down, right? So to create a new camera, it's just like we could create anything else. Like we can, it's probably in all of these menus here as well. But if I just go to create, cameras, camera, now I have a new camera in there. You'll see it's named camera 1. I could double click on it here and call it render me, right? That way I know which one to render. And if I tumble around, you'll see it looks like a camera, right? Like, or it looks like cameras used to look, at least. It looks like an old school film camera. And part of that's just so we can see where it's at, right? We can see like which we have from this. We can get a good idea of which direction this camera is filming, right? But this isn't really enough for me because I need to actually see what the camera is seeing to know what I'm looking at, right? So I can switch into that camera anytime I want to. If I go up to panels right here on it's in my viewport, panels, and then perspective, you can see I can choose between render me or perspective. I can hit render me, and now I'm seeing what my render me camera sees, right? Or I can go back to perspective, and I can move my render camera, go back to render me, right? See it changed, right? I can also move my render me camera here, right? Just by tumbling around the same way I did with my perspective camera. And when I go back to perspective, you see it moved my camera. So what I'm going to do, though, is I want to be able to see both of them at the same time. So under panels, there's another button in here called layouts. And layouts is going to let you break this up into different ways that the viewport is arranged. A good example of a layout is like when we were tapping spacebar, and it would put us in 5 different views. This is a different layout for this viewport, right? So one of the options I could do instead is my layouts, I could do 2 panes side by side. And when I do that, I get 2 windows side by side. I can still do that tap thing to go into each of these, right? Tap my spacebar. But now I'm looking through my perspective camera over here. So if I go over here and change this to my render me camera, now when I move it over here, I can see it update over there. And so this is a very nice way of sort of both being able to manipulate it and being able to see what I'm manipulating. But let's look at this. If I click over here, right, I have to sort of highlight this viewport for this to work, and go to Arnold and open my render view and render this. Well, one, this is rendering from my render me camera, or it's saying it is. It doesn't look like render me. Render me. It's not working. Let's close that down and try it again. Arnold, open render view. Set that. What if I set it to perspective? Okay, that's the perspective. There you go. So now it's rendering the render me view, right? And I want you to notice the difference in this. The biggest difference being the shape, right? My viewport over here is more like a piece of paper, right? It's tall, thin, right? Whereas over here, what I'm actually getting out of my render is short and wide, right? This size is what we're actually going to render. So it doesn't necessarily matter how we see it over here, right? Like, it will not change the way it renders just by changing the size of this window. If we want to actually see what is going to render, we have to click this button right here. So it's the resolution gate. So we have our grid. We can turn that on and off. We have this one here, which is called our film gate, which is also beneficial, but not right now. And it's this one right here with the blue dot in it, square with a blue dot. And you'll see with that, it'll kind of give you this guide. This is what you're actually going to see in your render, right? So let's say that what I want to see is starting here, right? And then ending over here, right? That's how I want my animation to play out. I just want my camera to sort of tumble around. Actually, let's start here so we can see the water, right? And then end somewhere over here, right? So just like anything else, I can animate this object. Our camera is just an object, right? I've kind of lost my object for right now. There it is. Right? So what I can do is I could just animate this from one location to the other, right? How I usually do it, though, is I move the object with this camera and I set the keyframes with this camera, right? So I'm on frame 1, just like we animated our car. I'm going to set a keyframe. What's the shortcut key for that? S for set, right? So we set that keyframe there. I'll go to the end of my animation to 120, and I'm going to tumble all the way around here, right, and sort of view it from over here. Now, the thing to remember is that that camera is going to work just like a real camera will, right? And just like a real camera, if you start filming something and you run 50 feet while you're swinging it around in the air, that video's not going to be easy to understand, right? It's going to be very shaky, nauseating, right? So be conservative with how much you move your cameras. So this is over 120 frames. That's 5 seconds. I moved it from one side to the other. I still have the camera selected. See that? It's in a new location. I'm on a new spot on the timeline. So I just hit S. And so now if I go back to here and hit play, you'll see that's my animation. Right? Now the thing you'll notice is that when I was posing this, right, I just tumbled, right? I hit Alt and I did like this, right? And when I'm doing that, I'm moving my camera in a big sweeping arc, right? I'm looking at an object and I'm sort of orbiting around it. Maya is basically a complicated calculator. When I set those two keyframes, Maya moved it in a straight line, right? Maya said you wanted it on point A and point B. I moved it in a straight line from point A to point B. So that means in the middle of my animation here, I'm kind of staring, like this isn't the best shot in the world, right? So I can always go in here and sort of adjust my camera, put it something like this, and as long as my camera is still selected, it's not. So I can either select my camera here to set a new keyframe, or while in this camera, I can click this button up here at the top, which will select the camera I am currently in. Right? And so since I put it in a new location, I can hit S, and so now I have a new keyframe. Now you'll notice that when I'm scrubbing here, it's not updating in this viewport until I let go. I have to click and highlight this viewport before that will work. And so now that's my animation. Okay. Just to be safe, I'm going to go ahead and save this really quick. I'm just going to put it on my desktop. Okay, just in case it crashes, and I can always pick it back up from here. So let's say you're at this point. You've done all of your animation, your cars are moving, you've made an environment for your cars, you've made some water, you've lit it, you have your cars crashing into the ocean, and it's like, it's, you know, this awesome finished thing. Now we need to see it rendered, right? And we already know how to render a single image. We can go to Arnold, open Arnold Render View, click that, right? We're getting a nice single image from our wrong camera again. Oh wait, no, that's the right camera. No, it's not. Why is it doing this? I guess it is. Okay. So we're getting this awesome rendered image from our camera. But I have 120 frames, right? And so we know how to get a single image. Getting all 120 images, like I literally have had people in my class before who like missed this lecture, and what they did is 120 times they rendered a single image and saved that image. Don't do that. Like let me show you the way of rendering this. What this is called is a batch render. There's actually two different ways of doing this with Arnold. Arnold has an alternative to batch render called render sequence, which allows you to see it rendering as you're doing that. But the main thing here is we need to make sure we have our project set. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and create a project for this file just because I haven't set it yet. So I'm going to go to File. Actually, let me go ahead and stop this render so it goes faster. File, Project Window, and I just need to create a new one on my desktop. Call this camera. Okay, that's okay. Wait, what just happened? Did it make it for me? No. Let's just go ahead and select my desktop then. Sorry. Desktop, select. This is where I type in camera. And what this is going to do is this is going to create an entire project folder on my desktop called camera. All my folders are in there. I could drop this cam folder in my scenes folder, but I'm just going to go ahead and save it again instead. So File, make sure I've set my project. For you all, you probably already have a bridge folder, right? So all you have to do is this part, Set Project, choose your bridge or your camera or whatever, hit Set. And so now when I go to Save, File, Save Scene As, it automatically takes me to the Scenes folder in my camera project. Save. Now, I recognize this just because I've been teaching how to use Maya for 10 years now. Like 75% of you will not do that. And that means a big chunk of people are going to show up on Monday and say, I don't know where any of my images are. I rendered for 18 hours and I don't know where any of my images are. What am I going to do? I'm going to fail this class. I don't know what to do. Right? I will say, remember when I was standing up there telling you to set your project? Set your project, right? Because if you set your project, when you render this sequence, it's going to go there. It's going to go into your camera's images folder. If you don't set your project, I have no idea where it's going to go. It will save it somewhere. It may be saving it in whatever project you were working on last, or it may be saving it locally on that machine, or it may be saving it in your documents, or it may be saving it on a computer you have in the library that you're working on, or it may be saving it on your computer at your house, but it's not where you needed it, which is in that cameras folder, right? So, or images folder. So the way we render a sequence is a little complicated. I will share another, actually it's already on my YouTube page under the playlist. I'll show you that here in just a second. Actually, let me show you that now. So inevitably you are going to forget this and you're going to want the quick version of this. That's not it. Switch accounts, Greg Marlow Learning. So if you're ever can't remember where this is at, again, Greg Marlow Learning. It's also, there's a link to it on YouTube or on the D2L site, but it's right here. Okay. And if we go to playlists, you'll see that there's a full playlist for this bridge project. Okay, that link is on D2L as well. And if you click on that,
Okay.
there's shorter versions of all of these videos. The sound is worse, and this was made about 3 years ago, so some of the options are going to change, including some of the render basics stuff probably isn't as good. But the things, the materials and lighting probably isn't as good because I think we were using Mental Ray at that time. But render basics and compiling rendering in Premiere, this is where you're going to find that stuff. Okay, but I'll go over it again right here. The first thing we need to do is go to our render settings. Okay, so remember we have this little clapboard that's going to render a single image, right? It's the one with no, it's just a blank white box in there. That's going to render a single image. This is Maya's render view as opposed to that Arnold render view, which updates in real time, right? So this is what one image will look like. Okay, and so we kind of understand that. I'm going to go ahead and cancel that. Over to, there's one that says IPR, and then there's one with a cog on it. And if I click the one with a cog on it, that's our render settings. Okay, this is where we can change all of the details about how our render is going to work. We can change some stuff about how much it samples it. We can put motion blur in here. We can do a whole bunch of stuff. And you'll see that there are multiple tabs in here, right? The only two tabs the majority of the stuff you're ever going to be working with are in these first two tabs. And in fact, most of everything we're going to be doing today is just in this common tab. Right? Now, you may have a different set of tabs here. And if you do, that means you're not set to Arnold Render View or Arnold Renderer. So you'll see this renderer you're using. We can choose all these others, right? The only one that's actually going to give you a good result is Arnold Renderer. Those other ones will give you a render, but it's not going to be anywhere near as nice looking as the one we're just looking at. So first things first, we need to make sure it's there, set to that. If yours isn't in there, you have to turn on the plugin the way we did the other day, which is under Windows, Settings and Preferences, Plugin Manager, and it's way down here toward the bottom by itself, MTOA, Maya to Arnold. That's what that stands for. So just make sure that's clicked as loaded. So, a couple of things to look at here. At the very top of this, you see where it says Paths, right under Common? That tells you where it's going to save your images. If you ever render and you're like, I don't know where my images went, open the file back up and look at that path. And as long as you haven't changed your project or moved to a different computer, that should give you the path of where your images went. Right? And by default, if you set your project, it's always going to put it in your camera's images folder. In fact, if you set a project to a folder that doesn't have an images folder, it will create one for you and put it in there. Right? It tells you the file name, cam.exr. I want to point out that that's just one image, right? And we're going to need a whole bunch of them. And it shows us our image size, so it tells us all about that. That's too small. So the first thing we're going to look at is this file output. Right now it says EXR. Right? Some of you are intimidated by that because you don't know what an EXR is, and you're going to change it to JPEG, and then you're going to render, and it's not going to look as good. Trust me when I say leave it on EXR. It's going to make a much larger image, but EXR is a better image. There's more you can do with an EXR after you're done. So let's say you render this, and you're not 100% happy with the lighting or the color correction in it. You can do more color correction work with an EXR than you can a JPEG or a PNG. It's much bigger, but EXR is just the default. That's what we should go for. Having said that, the only thing that will open an EXR is Premiere and Photoshop. Right? So if you render out a sequence, you want to see how it looks, you double click it and it says, which program do you want to open this in? Choose Photoshop. You can look at individual images there. We can open it up as a sequence in Premiere. So EXR, right now there's nothing to write in here, but we can write something in there if we want to. Let's go ahead and say test render. Now, what you always want to make sure of is that there's no numbers in the name of this, because that will really screw some stuff up because we're needing renders to have numbers later anyway. So if we scroll down a little lower, you'll see here, frame range, right? And you'll see that that's grayed out. Right? Remember when we're up there at the top, it says our file name is cam.exr. It's one frame, right? You're like, no, I need frames 1 to 120, but it's grayed out. And then at 3 o'clock in the morning, you'll send me an email and be like, Maya's broken. It won't let me render an image sequence. I don't know what to do. Go back and watch this video because I talked about it. The reason it's doing that is because of right here, frame animation extension. And you'll say, this is how Maya is asking you, how do you want me to name this file, right? And if I click on that, you'll see a whole bunch of options. But the one we have selected right now is name.extension. And since there's no number in there, that means it's only going to render one frame, right? We need one of these options that has a number sign in it. You need to have the extension at the end. If you accidentally render it incorrectly with like name extension number, that's okay. There's a couple of extra steps we have to do to rename all of those files. And like I've known people who've done it that way before and went through and manually renamed 120 files, right? Or 500 files. I don't remember how many it was. The one you want to choose is one of these with extension at the end. So I usually use name_number.extension. You could also use name.number.extension. And when I do that, you'll see that suddenly this frame range is open again, right? And you'll also notice that our frame names up here at the top change. Now it's test render _0001.exr to test render _0010.exr, right? So what it's going to do is it's going to render each of your frames as an image with a number at the end of it, right? And so we have frames 1 through 10 because our frame range right now is set from 1 to 10. If we change that to 1 to 120, click off there, you'll see now it's from 0001 to 0120, right? What this is going to do is it's going to render 120 EXRs into your image folder, right? And that's what we want. Now, the next question is which camera is it going to render? This happens every semester. Somebody forgets to change this, and you wait 18 hours for a render, and what you get is a camera that was staring at a brick wall, right? And you have to go back and re-render it. This is where you choose the camera you want to render, and I'm going to choose that Render Me camera we made, right? The next question is our image size. So HD 540 is the emergency, I need to turn something in render. But if it's that small, like there will be like some points that I'll have to dock from the grade. I think in the page, like in the write-up of this, I'll double check. We said a minimum of HD 1280. So I'll show you really quick. I'll double check really quick. Principles of animation, content. Okay, so in here our project, right? We got our assignments. So we're on PR1 bridge, right? And down here at the bottom, the final rendered Playblast. I'm sorry, final rendered, no Playblast. So where was it at? Here it is. The finished piece should be a fully rendered 10 to 12 second animation at a resolution of at least 1920 by 1080, which is HD 1080. If that render is taking too long, and for this project, you can do it as 720, okay? So let's look at that. Like, try it, and if you're like, this is going to take me a week to render all this thing, go ahead and downgrade it to 720. But if we click on presets, they're below this. So we got HD 540, HD 720, HD 1080. Right? So try 1080. If your renders are just enormous, or not enormous, but like taking forever, you can downgrade that to 720. Okay? So when it comes time to render this, let's scroll down and make sure we got everything. That looks like everything. I'm going to go ahead and close this, and then I'm going to save my file one more time. The reason I'm saving it is because those render settings should save with your file if you've set your project and open it correctly. So I'm going to go File, and I could just hit Save Scene, but that's going to save it over that cam file I made earlier, right? If I do Save Scene As, I can change it. I could add like O2 at the end of cam. And now I know that I have two versions of this. Like this is when I say saving iterative versions of this. Eventually you're going to have something happen and you're going to mess something up and you're going to be like, uh-oh, I just broke my file forever. And you have to start over from the beginning. Saving this as a numbered sequence means every time you save, you get a new file, and if something happens to that file, you can go back to the previous file, and at least you're not starting over from the beginning. So you can manually do that, but I use this right here. If you go File, Increment, and Save, it's going to add a number to the end of your file name and save it. So if I hit Increment and Save, you'll see now up here at the top of my thing here, it's cam.0001.mb. We go File, Save Scene As, you'll see right there it is. So basically it just took that and added a 0001 to the end of it and saved it. Now let's say I made a few changes, I moved this light a little bit or something, right? I go File, Increment and Save, and it just adds a 2 to that, 0002. Hard drive space is it's cheaper than it's ever been, right? I'm currently working on a project where my file number is 180. Right? I've incremented and saved 180 times, and if I start running out of hard drive space, I'll delete 20 through 150. Right? Like I don't need those anymore. Just so I have a few backups. Right? I have literally passed up 1,000 increments and saves in projects before, and there's nothing wrong with that. That means I cry way less often when Maya crashes, right? Not at all, but just less often. So once I have this saved, now it's time to start rendering that sequence, right? So under the tab here, rendering, I'm going to go to Render, and then right down here is Batch Render. Now, this should work. If for some reason it doesn't, we would use the one right above it where it says Render Sequence. That one will also do the same thing, but sometimes it's hard to make it render the correct camera with Render Sequence. So Batch Render is the one we cross our fingers and hope it works. If you use Batch Render on your computer at home, more than likely your renders are going to come out with an Arnold watermark on them. If you do it here, they're not. So that's something to think about. So if I hit Batch Render, I want you to watch what happens. It asks me, do I want to allow this other program to use my computer? The reason it's asking me this is because the Batch Renderer is actually a standalone program. After this starts rendering, I could technically close down Maya, and it'll continue to render on this computer until it's finished, right? So I'll go ahead and say Allow, and that work? Apparently. And so you'll see down here at the bottom now, it starts telling me what it's doing. Percentage of rendering done, 5%. That's 5% of file 0001, right? We're up to 8%. All right, so rendering takes a while because we have 120 of these. Right? If you're rendering at home, batch render, go to sleep, wake up on Saturday and hope it's done. I say Saturday because you don't want to do that on Sunday night and wake up on Monday morning and something went wrong, right? 16%. All right, we're moving. We're moving. This is why we use the render farm, because the render farm will each divvy up one of these images. I can help you try to put this on the render farm on Friday if you want to do a test on that. Or I can at least point you to the video again so you can watch through that when you're ready. So we're a quarter of the way done with the first image. A lot of people will batch render and then minimize all of this and open up Word and write that paper for their English class. Underestimating rendering, though, is probably the biggest issue that most people have in this first project. The first time I taught this class, only about half of the class showed up with a finished render. Every semester, a small percentage of people who just underestimated it show up without a render. Show up with something. Like, first and foremost, you need something to turn in. So maybe before you render, create a Playblast just in case everything explodes. You have something to turn in, right? Because you can always revise that grade. Ideally, what you want to be able to do is turn in your final render, and that way I can give you feedback on the entire thing, and then you can revise it again, right? Because like your lighting and rendering is part of the grade, right? So maybe there's ways I can show you to make that better as well. Now, we're not going to sit here and wait for all 120 of these frames to render for us to move on. I'm actually going to go ahead and cancel this batch render just for mine, but I will show you that where it's putting it in my camera images folder, it's right there. It's creating my EXRs. Right? And you can open this up, and after it's done with image 1, you can open image 1 and make sure your render is looking okay. Right? Make sure it's rendering from the right camera. And eventually this folder will just fill up with 120 files. That's what we want. So go ahead and go to render, cancel my batch render. Yes, I want to cancel it. So what you're eventually going to have is this, right? It's just a folder full of EXRs. This one is 60 of them. It's not very long. It's an animation I did for animation fundamentals. So if I double click on one of these, mine is automatically recognizing that this is a Photoshop file, or that this can be opened in Photoshop. It's going to ask you this question. So it recognizes there's an alpha channel in here. It asks, do you want to use that as an alpha channel or as transparency in the image? It really doesn't matter that much which one you choose. If you choose transparency, you'll see that there's no background. If you choose alpha, you'll see like whatever was in the background, usually just a gray or black background. So this is what one of them looks like. Right? Now the reason we do EXRs is because you've probably, how many of you have used Photoshop before? Like a good majority of you. If you haven't, don't worry. This is just me talking. But if I go to image adjustments and levels, right? You see this range of color here? Like from, this is my blacks, right? And I can sort of pull those like that. This is my whites. I can sort of crank those up, right? That range is actually bigger in an EXR, right? I guess it's more like there's more information packed into there, right? And so I can do more color correction without destroying my image in an EXR than I can in a JPEG, right? So this is one of the reasons we keep this, is because we can, or one of the reasons we use the EXR is because they're more versatile at this level. The other reason we use them is because I can hide things in my EXR file, right? If you think about an image, it's just a bunch of data saved as an image format, right? So right now, JPEG has 3 channels with data in it. It's got a red channel, a green channel, and a blue channel, right? A PNG has 4 channels. It's got red, green, blue, and alpha, right? An EXR can have an enormous number of channels. I honestly don't remember the number. I don't think it's infinite, but you can have like literally hundreds in there. And you're like, why do I need that, right? Well, maybe you need one channel just to tell you how far away an object is. And the reason you would need that is because that's just data. For every pixel, how far away from the camera is that pixel, right? And you're like, it's a flat image. It's not far away at all. Well, I can map that into After Effects or some other compositing program, and I could fake some depth of field, right? I can make the objects that are further away blurrier and the objects that are closer more crisp, right? And so we're baking all of this information into this image file that we can reuse later. Okay, I can show you how to do some of that if you're interested. So I'm going to go ahead and close this. What we're really going to use today is Premiere. How many of you have never opened Premiere before? All right, don't worry. I'm going to walk you through what you need to know. If for some reason this is like overwhelming, again, That's what this video right here is. Compiling renders in Premiere. It's under the Bridge Project playlist. And it's basically, I'm getting ready to go through this same exact thing right now. There's a bunch of EXRs, right? So we're going to type in Premiere, P-R-E-M, there it is. Premiere Pro CC 2018. Premiere is really buggy lately. I don't know if it's just on our computers or if Adobe just is, I don't know, Adobe sucks. Let's go ahead and click that and see what happens. It seems like it's going to open. And hey, I think it maybe did. I click off that. I don't care. Skip. There we go. So if it gives you some issues, doesn't open, again, it may just be where it's on where we're pulling it from the network or whatever. We can kill this and try it again. Usually the second time through it works. So I'm just going to do new project. This is honestly a throwaway project for me. I don't usually save this because I'm just compiling the images. So I don't really care where it puts it. Right now it's putting it in my documents folder. I'm like, sure, whatever. And this is what I get. Right? A lot of different panels here. The first one we really need to see here, though, is right here where it says Import Media to Start. Right? So if I right-click there, I can go to Import, and I could go find that image sequence. So my image sequence was there. Just going to highlight that address there. And back in Premiere, what's happening? Back in Premiere, I'll just paste that in. Up there. Dude, this thing is slow. Tell you what, I'm going to kill Premiere and go to Task Manager. More details. Usually the second time through it runs better. So end task and process. There we go. Let's try Premiere again.
It crashed and deleted a whole period of work for me the other day.
Yeah, I don't understand what's up with Premiere lately. Again, it may not be the program. It may be something to do with the way it's installed here on the network server. But yes, overwrite that. So it seems like it's working a little faster now. I can paste that in there. Yeah, this sometimes the second time through it just works a little bit better. Excuse me. So here's one of the questions, or one of the things that people mess up, is that they try to select all of these images. We don't need to select all of the images, right? And the reason for that is right down here at the bottom. You see where it says image sequence? Right there, right? That means Premiere is smart enough to count, right? It recognizes that all of our images are in a numbered sequence. So all I have to do is select the first one, 001, right? And then click image sequence. And it will import all of them in a sequence as if it were a movie. Right? Basically, it's doing most of what we want it to do right off the bat. Right? So I hit open, and it takes it a second. But there it is. And now if I mouse over this, you can kind of see, it's like it kind of plays through the sequence a little bit, right? Okay. It's a big sequence. Like those images, each of those images is 6 megabytes. And so this entire folder is... yeah, 403 megabytes, which means it's going to be a little slow inside of Premiere, but that's okay. Now, I could just drag this over here, right? But when I do that, it's going to create it's going to create what Premiere calls a sequence, which is like a way we can edit different videos together. And it would do it with the settings that are on this EXR series of images. Now, the problem with that is this is not playing at the right speed. If I did that, Premiere automatically wants to play this back at 29.97 frames per second. What does Maya work in? What's the frames per second in Maya? 24, right? Which means it would try to play my video too many frames per second, right? It would play it too fast. It would be just a little too fast. So I want to make sure that it understands what my video is. So I'm going to right click, and it's under Modify, Interpret Footage. Okay. And so you'll see right there, use frame rate from file. It thinks 29.97. I'm just going to tell it, no, use 24. Assume this frame rate. Now, also where this has an alpha channel, you'll see in the area over here where it's black, I could make it ignore that alpha channel, and I could put this in front of other backgrounds if I wanted to. So I'll probably, let's say, I think it should just work automatically. If not, we can always come back in here. So I'll go ahead and hit OK. And when I do, you see it changed the length. It did say 2 seconds. Now it says 2.12 seconds, right? And so if I drag this over here in my timeline and release it, it will create a new sequence with that as my video. When I hit play, you'll kind of see the animation play through, right? So yours should do this. Now, when I was talking about that alpha as your background here, if I were to create I just dragged this up a layer, so I'm on layer 2. And in here, I can create a new item, and I could do something like a color matte. All right, so let's do that, and just choose like this sort of, let's try blue so it'll contrast with this thing. So I made sort of like this blue background, right? Now if I drag this on top here, it will cover up my video, right? I just have this blue video on top of my EXR sequence. If I drag it below it, you'll see that I now have it in the background instead of black, right? And that's because when Maya rendered this, it rendered it with the background as transparent, right? And I can always do that. But you'll notice that I'm getting this like white outline around everything, right? So that's this other thing in our interpret footage. So I'll right click on that again, modify, interpret footage. And I think it's right here, pre-multiply alpha. If I click, oh wait, so do it. Actually, I'm wrong, sorry. Modify, interpret footage. It's not the pre-multiply alpha, it's confirm alpha pre-multiplication, I think. There we go. And so now I can put this, you know, whatever I want here. I could even have another image back there. You could have this doing this in front of your, you know, your backyard at your house, right? So this is all in Premiere. That's great. A lot of people save this Premiere file and turn in that Premiere file, and I'm like, I can't use that for anything. Like this Premiere file just tells your computer how to edit your videos together, right? What I need is an MP4 file. To get that, we go to File, Export, Media, because a video is a type of media, and it's going to bring up this this export settings. Now, when you take principles of visual effects with Livingston or Van Huss, they're going to show you way more information about this. I'm going to show you what an animator needs to know, which is basically where this says Format AVI. Click that little drop-down box and choose H264 right there. And that's going to change all of your settings good enough to where we can have something to turn in for this class, right? I would advise you to keep those EXRs for later in case you need to do more editing to it or whatever. But this will work. And now the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to click on my output name because it's going to try to save it somewhere and I'm never going to find it, right? I need to know where I'm putting this. So right now it's trying to put it under my documents, Premiere 12.0. Like I'm never going to find that, right? So I usually go back to my desktop camera folder. You can put it in your images or you can put it in movies, either one, right? And you can name it whatever you want to, right? I'll name this Marlow underscore step. I don't know why I always capitalize that A. There we go. Hit save. So we're not done yet. All we have to do now is hit export. And what this is going to do is kind of render it again. It's going to compile it all of these images into a compressed video. So if I hit export, shouldn't take too long, a few seconds. Longer videos, like once you get into the visual effects class, or if you, how many of you have already taken the visual effects class? Okay, so there's like some of these exports will take much longer, like they may take like an hour just to compile all your video if you have a whole bunch of stuff going on in there. We don't in this one. The other thing that will slow it down is if you're pulling it from a slower device. Like right now, I'm pulling these images from the network, and where it's having to do that in as fast as it can, it slows it down a little bit. If I were pulling these from my D drive on my computer, it would probably go faster. So it says it's finished. I'm not going to close this yet until I'm sure. I'm going to go back to my movies folder. Hey, look right there. I got something. So if I double click on that, no. I'm going to right click on this, open with, choose another app. I'm going to choose Windows Media Player. Always use this. That is not it. I'm in the wrong folder. Sorry. Desktop. It's under this movies folder. There we go. I was like, why is it an MOV anyway? So this is my MP4. And when I open it, set this to loop, you'll see that it compiled it together into an image sequence. This is a little like teaser for you. This is a character you get at the end of the next animation class, or not at the end, about halfway through the next animation class. And this is the second to last project that we do in animation fundamentals, right? Sort of leading up to character animation. So I'm going to go ahead and stop there, but if you're interested in character animation, this is sort of where you get started with that, as we have a relatively simple robot character do a step through an object. And so this is the demo that we do for that. So, okay. Any questions? Comments? I took up a little bit more time than I really intended to today. So I'm going to go ahead and end class here, upload this video, so you should have it on YouTube in just a minute. And if you have any questions or want to hang around and ask stuff, after that, that's cool. I'll be here on Friday, and I strongly encourage you, if you're struggling with stuff, to be here Friday to ask questions, not at 8:05 a.m. on Monday, right? Because that's going to be probably too late to fix any of the stuff you have problems with. Okay, cool. Rest of the class is yours.